please give it up for David McWilliams.
Thank you so much, Emily. I think before I start, huge round of applause for Emily. Oh, really? Seriously? Putting these things on is not just a labour of love, it's a labour, and a serious amount of labour. So thank you all, everybody who's been involved in organising this wonderful, wonderful festival. Thank you all, and I am delighted and kind of honoured to be the final speaker tonight. It was interesting. I spoke this afternoon, and I'd never met David Gillick before, but I told him a story. I have a David Gillick story. In another life, I still play pathetic five-a-side football with fellas who are far too old and in a terrible state to play football. And about 10 years ago, so this team's been together since we were kids, more or less. And about 10 years ago, we were the proper team. Then we were the over 35s. Then we were the over 45s. And then we started to get into that very twilight world of the 50s. And we decided to play an 11-a-side football match in Coolock. And we were trying to hide. It was a place called Vianney Boys. If anybody knows anything about Dublin football, you'll know about this outfit. Hard as nails. And we were trying to hide the fact that we were the Blackrock College old boys team, right? So that doesn't go down very well in Coolock, I can tell you that. And so we kind of shape up to the team. And the place in Coolock is called the San Siro, the stadium, because it's got 4 big flats complexes around us, right? So we're walking onto the pitch and we start playing, and I'm stuck out in the wing, and the ball is, one of our lads hoofs it, and first of all the guy who's marking me reminds me that the centre half, big lad, he just says, your man's just after getting out of the big house. So straight out of the joy onto the pitch, right? And I'm like, Jesus. Anyway, the ball lands and over the head, and I'm legging for the ball, and the guy beside me just says, you're no David fucking Gillick. What can you do? What can you do? The other thing I'd just like to say is that Gemma Hayes doesn't know this, but I write when I write, and I write always with music blaring. I don't know. It's something I've done since I was a kid. Most people can't understand it. I have to have music incredibly loud. And I wrote a book about 20 years ago called The Pope's Children. And the soundtrack to that book was a Gemma Hayes song called Back of My Hand, on replay about 1,000 times. I can sing it back to you. So thank you so much. Anyway, we're here to talk about the world. Where do we start? Where do we start? My God. You know, Vladimir Lenin once said that there are decades when nothing happens, and there are weeks when decades happen. And you have that feeling that we are living through those weeks. I mean, every time you turn on your phone, the newspaper, whatever, you know, it's Greenland, it's Venezuela, it's AI, it's Bitcoin. You know, take your pick. And it's incredibly difficult to know where to start when you're trying to analyze this world of ours. And if I was a typical economist, I would come here armed with the tools of my trade. The graphs, the mathematics, statistics, God forbid the PowerPoints, right? But I come here only armed with a little bit of poetry. Now this book is very well thumbed. It is the selected works of W.B. Yeats. It feels like a book I had in the Leaving Cert. I enjoyed the Leaving Cert so much I did it twice. But I want to quote from a poem that we know, that we learned around the Leaving Cert, called The Second Coming. So the Second Coming, Yeats is writing this poem. He publishes it in 1922. And it's written in a collection of poems called The Dancer, which he wrote between 1919 and 1922. And he's sitting in Dublin and he's trying to understand the world. And if you imagine the world in 1922, it's just after the First World War. You have the end of the Ottoman Empire. You have the end of the Austrian Empire. You have the collapse of the German Empire. You have the arrival of the radio. You have the arrival of technology. We always say, oh, our technological change is so dramatic and it's so unbelievable. No. Imagine what the electricity arrival in this country did for people. Imagine what the radio did. The very first BBC broadcast was in 1922. Imagine what the radio did. Imagine how the world became so small once the radio started. And Yeats is sitting there and he's trying to figure out what's going on. And he writes these words, turning and turning in the widening gyre. The falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed on the world. A blood-dimmed tide is loosed. And everywhere the procession of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction. The worst are full of passionate intensity. Now, when you hear those words, they could have been written yesterday to describe our world. Because what happens is, every crisis, every generation is slightly narcissistic about the crisis they face. They're like, oh my God, this is the worst. The world has never faced any of that carry-on before. Never, right? That's not the case. Think about what our grandparents as Irish people went through. Yeats is also talking about the fact that this country is partitioned. This country has gone through a war of independence. It's about to go into a civil war. All this is happening in our grandparents' time. And of course, the key to crises isn't the crisis itself, but the challenge is, how do you react to the crisis? And what Yeats said was, things will fall apart, the center will not hold, anarchy will be loosed upon the world, a blood-dimmed tide will be loosed, the procession of innocence, everything we assumed during the peacetime, will be drowned. But he said something interesting. He said, that will only happen if the best lack all conviction, allowing the worst people in society with their passionate intensity to win the day. Now, what fascinates me about this particular poem is just how accurate Yeats was. So by the following year, you have Mussolini has taken over in Italy. Hitler has had his putsch in Germany, in Munich, and Stalin is on the ascendancy in Russia, the Soviet Union. So Yeats was absolutely accurate in his assessment of what was going on. And what fascinates me as an economist, for my own tribe, is that when you contrast what Yeats, the poet, was saying with what the economists were saying, the people who were actually paid to think about the future, my gang, right? What were my gang saying? They were saying, oh, don't worry, we'll go back, free trade will emerge, the Germans, they'll pay all that reparation stuff, don't be worried about that. Yeah, of course they'll pay. We had this expression, the war to end all wars, the First World War. There was like, this was it. We've learned our lesson. So the economists, the journalists, the commentators, the column-inch writers, the advisors to governments, the military people were all saying that the world will recalibrate back to where it was before the First World War and we move on. And of course that didn't happen. The opposite happened. And what's always fascinating me is, why did Yeats, the poet, see the world so clearly at a tipping point? And why did my crowd, the economists, get things so wrong? And I think it's because poets, artists, musicians, give themselves at a tipping point the permission to think unconventionally. They allow themselves the latitude to think unconventionally. They write songs about little boys who were bullied at the age of 6. Economists don't do that. I can tell you, Gemma, and anybody else in this place, right? And they give themselves at a tipping point just the latitude, the permission to think unconventionally. And we are now at a tipping point in world affairs. And the question is, do we elevate the unconventional thinker in our country? I mean, we like to think we do. It's much nicer to go to the bar and say, oh, me, I'm fucking unconventional. Me, I'm the most unconventional person in the world. Nobody wants to go to the bar, so I'm very conventional, right? But do we actually, let's consider this question. Do we, in Ireland, embrace unconventional thinkers? And maybe the best way, or place, to answer that question is to go back to the place we learned to think initially, and that's school. So I want you to imagine yourself, let's say your 13-year-old self, right? Imagine your 13-year-old self. Remember your 13-year-old self. Can you remember what you looked like? I had this mad red fro. It looked like an orange mic just hanging out, right? And I remember the class. I was in a prefab in a national school. I remember it so well. And the place smelt of wet sheep. Do you remember that Ireland in the 1970s? We had gabardines that you'd put on the radiator, and it would just steam up, and everything just smelt of some sort of recently dead animal, right? That had been left out. And I remember the Egypts I hung around with. Two of them were in the same football team, actually, where we were mistaken for keen athletes I remember the school, the Mrs. Daly effect. I remember the teachers. What I really remember about that year in school, this I think is the final year in national school, about to go into secondary school. It's a huge, big deal. And I remember all the mad little brains of the fellas in my class, right? Sparking up, fellas, I don't get that, and all this sort of thing. And then you go to secondary school, and it's the same thing. It's a big version of that. And there's people who most of my mates are in school that I actually did the Leaving Cert with, the fellas who did it twice. There's about 5 of my gang of 7 fellas spent the entire school days, 5 of them spent looking out the window. They hadn't a rashers what was going on, right? They just didn't get it. But it wasn't that school they didn't get school. School didn't get them. And they've gone on to have really good lives. They've done lovely things. They've nice families. Some of them gone to business. Or they've done grand. But their intelligence was not even recognized in school. And we know as you get older that there's hundreds of types of intelligence. There's actually hundreds of right answers to the same question, depending on where you're coming from. But those types of people, their intelligence, slightly lateral thinking, slightly different, slightly deviant, I suspect, just unusual in terms, it wasn't rewarded. But not only was it not rewarded, the type of intelligence that was rewarded in our schools, in every single school in this country, was the little kid, boy or girl, who can come in, sit in the front, absolutely still, do this every time you got an exam, right? Remember those fuckers, right? Okay. We call it collaboration, right? As we get older, right? But then it's copying. Mad stuff, right? But that little kid can come in, absorb all this information into his little head in a logical, coherent fashion, clear, and then on the 10th of June, write like fuck. That is the intelligence that we actually reward. Now, don't get me wrong, it is a form of intelligence. It is an intelligence, but it's only one type, and it's almost like getting a little fáinne for being a walking filing cabinet, right? Okay? All the other kids are outside. They've been sent out to the principal, right? Looking at the window, right? The problem is not only were those kids not recognized, they were actually humiliated. They were besmirched, their intelligence was degraded, and they were reinforced this idea that they did not fit in. And when we get older, we know that life changes that. But as a result of this system we have in our schooling system here, there are thousands and thousands of incredibly clever people in our country who left school feeling very stupid. But the corollary is also the case. There are many actually quite stupid people who left school feeling very intelligent, very clever, right? I know, I teach in Trinity, I get the feckers, right? I get them coming in first year, you should see them. I'm telling you, that school, Gonzaga, has a lot to answer for. Little fuckers coming into me, called Hugo. Anyway, and of course, those are the sort of kids who've always been told they've got the right answer. They're clever kids. You've got the right answer. You're the kid with the right answer. And of course, teachers tell them they're clever. Their mates reinforce they're clever. Their mammy tells them they're clever. Oh yeah. I was trying to explain to an American audience recently what an Irish mammy was like. And I was just there, I said, an Irish mammy is the sort of mother that makes an American soccer mom seem unambitious. Yeah? We love them, right? But we know what they are, right? Okay, I am the son of a national school teacher. I can tell you chapter and verse out in the bar about the outlandish ambitions of my mother, okay? But something odd happens in society. Is those kids that come into me in Trinity, they do very well because they're great at exams, they do really, really well, and they do a master's, they do really, really well, then they get on the graduate training program with the big five, and they do really, really well, and they end up in the Department of Foreign Affairs, and in the old days in the banks before the banks went bust, and didn't realize, and then they go into the Facebooks of this world, and they go into Silicon Docs, and, you know, one of the various different consultancies, I don't know, Ernst & Young, yada, 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 yada. And then something really weird happens at the interview process there, right? Is that they're going to interview, and the person interviewing them is exactly the same as them, but is 20 years older, right? They're like, oh no, you went to Trinity, oh fuck, amazed. You got first, oh my God, Jesus Christ, that's amazing. You did a PhD here at Harvard, oh fuck Harvard, amazing. So did I, know you're clever. Oh no, you're very clever. Oh, you're incredibly clever. Oh my God, fucking have the job. Right? So the interview process is like a Tinder for people who can do algebra, right? And then something weird happens. Humans, we're great, I love us, but I mean, one of the great things about humans is we like to think, you know, you say, oh yeah, I like to hang around with people who are really very different to me, who think differently. Oh yeah, absolutely. I surround myself with, you know, people who challenge me. No, we don't. There's a thing in psychology called confirmation bias, right? We love people who confirm our biases, right? We just do. And how that works then in society, particularly a small country like ours, is groupthink. So what you get in big companies and in the civil service and in the decision-making areas, you get lots and lots of people who think like each other. And you get groupthink at the very, very top. And all these kids who have become adults are defined by the fact that they were always the children from the age of 7 who had the right answer. And if you always have the right answer, what is the hardest thing to admit? That you're wrong. So you cling on to being wrong rather than admit that you're possibly infallible. And that's when we make big mistakes. And of course, the overconfident people consistently overestimate their competence. It's a thing in psychology called Dunning-Kruger, which is a kind of a mad thing. It's actually a true story. In Pittsburgh in the 1990s, a fella goes in to rob a bank, right? And he's a rather noticeable chap, let's just say. Okay? Big man. He goes in to rob a bank, and of course the security cameras are everywhere. And he's not wearing a mask. And not only is he not wearing a mask, he winks. How are you? All right, boss, story. Produces the gun, robs the bank. Coppers arrive in about 10 minutes later. Your man pegs it. Coppers say, give us a look at the camera. Oh, okay. Does anyone know this guy? He says, oh, yeah, I know him. Yeah, he lives around the corner. The 6th apartment there, number block 5. Yeah, he's grand. Coppers say, okay, fine. They go in, they knock on the door. Your man's sitting there. And the copper says to him, I'd like to arrest you. The man says, for what? The copper says, for robbing the bank. He says, what bank? The cop says, oh, look, we've got the evidence. We have it. We know it's you. He said, how could you possibly know? How could you possibly know I robbed the bank? I wore the juice. And the cop looked at him and said, what? Now, does anybody remember invisible ink? Right? Do you remember that at school, right? And if you squeeze lemon juice on the invisible ink, it disappeared, right? This tulip, okay, thought that if he wore the juice, so he sprayed all sorts of lemon juice all over his face, that he'd be invisible. The extremely incompetent overestimate their competence, right? This is a human phenomenon. People thought it was a funny story, then some psychologists thought, no, this is quite interesting, and they ran loads and loads of tests and loads of things, and it is true. And do you think it is more prevalent in men or women? I noticed this in our home, in school at our home, where my kids, when they were teenagers, my daughter would come in and she'd do an exam, and she'd say, I'd say, how'd you do, Liz? She goes, oh, Dad, oh, God, question 1B, 5X, I give the wrong answer, and then I looked and I checked, and disaster. The young fella, right? The young fella whose room just stank of weed from the age of 13 till 18, right? Come in. Throw the bag in the thing. I'd say, how'd you do? I fucking aced that, man. Right? And he failed everything. Right? But just the young fella's confidence, right? The truly incompetent overestimate their confidence, right? But how that works in our society, groupthink, incompetence, and unwillingness to admit that you're wrong, that's when we make major mistakes. And our country is small. And the problem with being small is not that we all know each other. And I have met many of my cousin's friends in the last 24 hours since being here. I had no idea, okay? But when we make mistakes, we make big mistakes. It wasn't that, in the last crisis, 2008, the entire administrative class missed the thing. They missed the entire crash. Do you remember the soft landing? Do you remember ooh, Jesus, that'll be fine, don't worry, it'll be grand. And I remember having to be on TV, doing, as my mother would say, the prime time. My mother puts the article before everything. The RTE, the prime time, the whole thing. And I'd be on, and Miriam would go, David, what's happening to the economy? Jesus. And I'd be saying, and of course, one of the big bank economists would be there, and they'd be sitting there, saying, don't worry, it'll be fine. The big bank economists, I'd always notice, they've big square heads. Do you ever notice that? It's like talking to a flat screen television. It's like, anyway, the point is not that they were not clever. Actually, on paper, these are the cleverest people in Ireland. But they couldn't admit that they might be wrong, so we went over the cliff together. Right? Okay? Holding hands, in effect, over the cliff. Right? Okay? And that is what we need to worry about now. Galbraith, if you have to read economics, I mean, I know there could be insomniacs out there and you might have to read it, but if you do have to read economics, the best writer is a guy called J.K. Galbraith. Huge man, 6'9". JFK's economic advisor, wrote like an angel. And he said something about the conventional man. He said, when faced with the choice between changing his mind or finding the proof not to do so, the conventional man always gets busy looking for the proof. And that's where we make mistakes. And you better get that. Because I'm going to conclude. Just think of the poet's words again. Think of the second coming. Yeats wrote, turning and turning in the widening gyre. The falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart. The center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed on the world. A blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the procession of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction. The worst are full of passionate intensity. So what Yeats was saying was that we are not without our power. We are not without the ability to respond and mold the world and our country the way we want to do it. But if the best people in society say, it's not my problem, it's somebody else's problem, that allows the worst people in society to come through and win and steal the day. And that's in effect what is happening in the United States. It's in effect what has happened in the United Kingdom over the last 10 years since, for example, the Brexit vote. And when I look around at the people here at Resonance, you are the best people. You are the people with the networks, with the contacts, with the influence, with the concern, with the vision. And it strikes me that we shouldn't be despondent, and that we shouldn't be fatalistic, and that we shouldn't be defensive. We should be active, because things are in our hands, our own hands. So if you really want to understand the future, and you really want to see things clearly, my only advice to you is listen a little bit less to my crowd, the economists, and listen a little bit more to Yeats's crowd, the poets, and everything will become much clearer. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much.